Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're going to be talking about Blanket by Craig Thompson. This is a graphic novel that was on the list of 13 books recently removed in Utah schools, obviously because of what I do here on the channel, which is going through these books to see what they're about when they are challenged is something that I do here, and I do it both through actual lists or reports, and I do it through recommendation when books are brought up. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Before we get into the book, we are going to go over what the criteria are for the removal of the book. I am also going to just talk about my opinions on the creation of the book because I think the book itself has issues, and especially the ending pisses me off. And so I'm not going to talk about this book and not talk about my response as a reader to how I feel about this piece of shit book. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Memoir, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creative genius. The second way to be featured is through the Fresh Meat feature, where if you are an indie author with a book out or a book that is coming out, if you submit the first chapter and the cover, it'll be read here on the channel, the first chapter will, to hopefully help more readers find your work, because your readers are vast, they are plenty, they may not be me, they could be me. We'll find out, but I'm trying to do what I can to get your creative stuff out there the best way that I can with my minimal budget of just what I can do. So here we are. The third thing is, if you want to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books. Judge me, it's fine. I like the books. I don't promise that you will. With that said, let's jump into this. Because I like being punished, not even just by the books, but more by the uncharitable conversations that revolved around the book removals, I've picked up this book from the Utah list. I am deciding to try to not use the word banned book anymore because I think it elicits a certain response. Something I noticed in the video comments on Saturday had to do with people saying they agreed with adult books not being in schools, but they disagreed with bans, while not realizing that the entire conversation was about removing some of these books from schools, that, you know, some of these adult books from school libraries only. So if the issue is the phrase book ban, then I'm going to not use the word book ban. So this book was removed from all public schools in Utah. It is still available in public libraries, bookstores, online libraries, universities, and private schools where they had been held before, and charter schools. So there is that. It's a comic, and a long one at that, about 600 pages. There are 8 parts to it, and then a 9th part that is footnotes. The 9th part that is footnotes is completely stupid. We're gonna get there. The author of this book also worked for Nickelodeon, DC, Dark Horse, Marvel, Owl, National Geographic Kids, and other publications. Also, it should be known that the main character of this book is named Craig Thompson, as the book is described as autobiographical. However, as typical with autobiographical or biographical books on this channel, we're going to be talking about this as characters in a book instead of making it personal about the author. Also, realize that I am busted enough that I naturally don't trust everything that I read. So if I distrust the book, that's going to get me a different reading on it. And yes, I do distrust the book, and we'll get into why at certain places. It should also be mentioned that on the Wikipedia page for this author, it says that they have a sister, but it is an unnamed sister. And then this book also never discusses a sister in it. So I don't know if this author does actually have a sister or if that's a typo on Wikipedia, but it is something to put out there since this is autobiographical, and that becomes an issue with trying to tell the difference between these two things. I was also on the website trying to figure out how abusive the author's parents actually were, because the front of the book implies that they were abusive, while the latter half of the book implies that they were not really abusive, they were just strict. As is typical with book reviews that have to do with comics, we're going to flip through the comic book as I talk about the book, and I will flag any of the spots that go with the description given by the Utah state law that got this book flagged. Now, before we get started in the actual synopsis, the specific declarations for the Utah state law have a questionnaire that went out to the schools, and in that questionnaire, there were 3 options for marking if this was contained within the book. 1. It contains a description or depiction of human genitals in a state of sexual stimulation, or arousal. 2. It contains a description or depiction of an act of human masturbation, sexual intercourse, or sodomy. Or 3. It contains a depiction or description of fondling or other erotic touching of human genitals or the pubic region. So I will mention as we go through the book where it may break the law, and then for the further part of this, it was not just marked once by one teacher, one place. It says if 3 from different schools removed the book for one of these 3 reasons, then it would be recalled from every school in Utah. So it's not just one person. Now, with that said, we're going to go through the book, and again, I will mark any spots that violate Utah law, and then we will keep going. The book opens with a narrator and his brother laying in bed, as the narrator says that as kids, he was forced to share a bed with his brother. And because they were kids, they had no say in what happened. They fight over the space, while Craig is also annoyed that his brother is talking until his brother, whose name is Phil, pushes him off the bed. The noise brings their dad in, and the boys complain and even ask why they're required to share the same exact freaking bed and room because they don't want to. Dad says that it's because I say so, don't freaking question it. Then Dad says if you boys don't shut the frick up and get along, then Phil is going to go into the cubby hole. And I can only assume that this isn't the first time that it's happened, so it's a little weird that they continue to go back and forth until Phil gets plucked out of the bed. The cubby hole is described as, quote, hidden behind a removable wood paneling in the playroom lurked this strip of space with splintering, rotting floorboards and its own barely breathable atmosphere of suspended dust. Uninsulated, unlit, and uninhabited, except for spider and vermin we heard skittering within the walls at night, and a few dust-filled cardboard boxes. It actually looks like it's a storage space because the narrator, Craig, goes into it later and gets stuff out of it, but I digress. Phil is then left in there, and the narrator says, quote, I should have been the one locked in the cubbyhole that night because I was a pathetic older brother. I neglected my protective role in dangerous situations. At other times, when Phil needed a play companion, I demanded to be left alone, but perhaps worst of all, I'd constantly threaten him by discouraging discoveries for the real world, as if 3 years of seniority made me an expert. This skips to Craig telling his little brother that he'll have homework, no friends, and get beat up in 3rd grade, and so the future sucks. So I'm legit asking if this is the author trying to vent about mistakes that he made as a kid. Immediately it started giving me feelings of Flamer, which felt more like a therapy book and like self-fan fiction as opposed to actual autobiography, especially the part with the Mountain Dew bottle jacking off in it and then saying, whatever of these 9th graders that can't jack off in the bottle have to drink it at Boy Scouts. Never had a Boy Scout confirm that was anything that they ever did, but, you know. Yeah, no. Anyway, it felt more like, I wish that I had done this fiction, and this feels more like a journal. And we're also, like, Raina is a part of this, but he spends a lot more time talking about his feelings about his brother than he does about Raina, so it's kind of like unfocused. We'll get into it. But on top of that, I've also been in contact with other people, other writers seeking publication because they felt like they wronged people in their youth and their childhood and their teenagerhood, and they thought that publishing a book would be an apology for the way that they had treated those people. So it's not really far-fetched to act or to say, like, I did this as an apology or as a thought, but also the way that his parents are treated in this kind of makes me wonder. Anyway, we skip to a panel where the bullies are making fun of the kid for being skinny, and he's so skinny that he looks like an Ethiopian, and that's a very specific insult. Craig is further bullied. Bullies then go on to say that his dad looks like a Mexican, his mom is so religious that it makes the entire town sick, and that his brother has messy hair and a retarded voice. They toss him off some minor cliff somewhere after calling him a baby, and they end up leaving him there after tossing him off. He's bleeding in the bathroom using the toilet paper to slow down the bleeding and rubs his bloody hands all over the mirror in a fit. This makes him late for class. The teacher is mean and doesn't accept his apology. He's given an F for his creative writing project because it was an 8-page poem about people eating excrement. The class laughs. The teacher tells him that his mother would be disappointed in him, and Craig is like, quote, if only God could forgive me for all of the times I pictured people eating their own excrement, along with his picture of people eating their poop with big shit-eating grins, obviously. Skip to a scene where he's thinking about his babysitter taking him into a side room where he says, tee hee, I'm gonna tell you a joke, tee hee 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 hee. And it implies that there is nobody else in there, that they're alone, that they're being sexually abused, and it's going to imply sexual abuse later. Don't think that this is ever going to come up or be, talked about anywhere, be thought about anywhere. It doesn't. It just is kind of dropped here. And after Craig has his turn in the room alone, then the babysitter walks off with his little brother. And back at school, the teacher says after class he needs to talk to Craig and he better not cry this time, while the bullies continue calling him a baby who sucks on his mommy's titties, and they toss his bag everywhere. The bus leaves without him, though he catches up with it, and the driver stops, though the driver looks like he's seen some serious business. His house is the last stop at the end of the day because he lives out in the country. His mother is showing him something that his brother created in kindergarten and then goes and says that he should go say hi to Phil. Phil is in the living room watching Tom and Jerry, and the only comment that Craig has to offer is that he hopes Tom falls off a cliff and dies. He says that when he was younger, he thought that the worst thing in the world was being alive, and that there had to be something better than that. He often thought about running away, but by doing that, the world would only dole out more cruelty, no matter what he did. He says that he should have been happy for what he did have, because it wasn't the worst, and anyway, there was an easier way to escape than actually running away. It was dreaming. Craig's other way of escaping was through drawing, which he and his brother did together in order to bond. He says that they drew all day, and these were the moments of his childhood that he could think of that were the only ones worthwhile. The boys are then sneaking around out in the woods and come across a cow skull that they play with. They aren't allowed to bring it in because the mom says that the bones are dirty and they need to not play with them. And they can't stay outside and play more because despite it being the weekend, they have church tomorrow, so they're going to get up early. It's Sunday school and the teacher says bad things happen sometimes and then asks Douglas over here how it felt to break his collarbone. Douglas is like, this hoe can't be serious, before he confirms that, yeah, breaking your collarbone is not, in fact, a good time. The teacher says they're all going to die someday, and isn't that scary? But it doesn't have to be if you're a Christian, and ask Jesus into your heart, because then you'll go to heaven. And the teacher says, compare current time, compare the life of a human to eternity, and you're just a blip on the radar, a dream that you'll eventually wake up from. In that moment, Craig says that he wanted to go to heaven. Not surprising when he just said that life was a curse, and he wants eternity forever because he'll escape from the temporary misery. I don't know. I don't know if this is the kind of stuff that you should really be telling a third grader, especially a suicidal third grader, but it is what it is. Now, as a teenager, he's still surrounded by bullies, mocking him as he passes through. I'm kind of wondering how he coped through school as a third grader who was already idealizing suicide, but that's never going to come up. If you thought that you were going to get, like, really any reflection on anything that is a deep character thing for Craig, you're not. He's sitting in class having his teacher telling him to apply himself, but he feels like he is giving up his soul by doing the work that he doesn't want to do. Skip to a pastor talking to him about being in senior year and asking him what his plans are after school. Maybe he should consider joining the ministry, and he tells the kid that God definitely thinks that he should join the ministry. God thinks that you should do it, bruh. Craig says he realizes he never fully committed himself to the faith. He was focused more on other things. His dad is later burning his art, so it looks like that's what's been taking his attention from the faith, and he's also wanted to burn everything that he'd drawn because he also feels like he was wasting his time on the most secular and selfish thing in the world, which was, in this case, pursuing art. This also kind of brings another way to look at the thing he does later. It just makes his situation with Raina even more terrible. I can't stand this character. I hate this character. I hate this character for what he does. Anyway, so he burns all of this stuff and is trying to avoid the secular, selfish ways of the world, which are pursuing art, drawing, dreaming. So burning the art felt like giving a sacrifice to God. He also says that he wanted to destroy his art because they were tied to memories. Memories of being told that he was going to hell if he didn't pursue God, and all of the scary images conjured up by the teachers in Sunday school saying what hell would be like, which he described as you're alone, no one can hear you, no one's going to help you, and he associates that with being locked in the cubbyhole. We get into chapter 2, where Craig says that he lives in an old farmhouse with poor ventilation, and he describes the bedroom that he shares with his brother as too hot to sleep in. They fight a little bit, and then they come up with this plan to rub themselves in spit so they're so wet that their parents might let them actually get out the fan because they are so moist. Phil doesn't want to do it, but then Craig spits all over himself first and then rubs his spit all over Phil, and they go downstairs and they're like, oh, the kids are covered in moisture. Yeah, they should definitely be able to take out the fan. Then it switches to it being winter and just how cold it is in the room upstairs. You would think that they would have dealt with something in there, but it looks like they may be fairly poor, which is why the house is not best suited, period, for anything. He says winter is the best, however, because despite it being freezing, Craig says that winter is the best because there is winter break, though winter break is partially interrupted by, quote, sharing Christ-centered recreational activities with Christian youth. The other kids at winter camp make fun of him for being poor, and he felt like that was so much worse than being made fun of at school, because at least he could think of the cruelty at school as being repaid by God, because God would gift him later for being rejected by secular situations. However, when the church continued to dole out the suffering, he felt like he was disappointing God. While the boys are in their bedroom/cabin talking about groping tots and bra sizes, Craig is over here looking at his Bible, and so they make fun of him for that too. They all get snapped at to shut the frick up, and after a second time, they finally actually go to bed. He can't sleep because of all of the snoring, so he sneaks out and ends up in a clubhouse where he prays to God and apologizes for all of his perceived wrongdoing, as you can sort of see right here. In high school, Craig says that their trips weren't as bad because he learned how to identify the other outcasts. So now we get him approaching some other kids who are over here being wallflowers, as everybody else who has money prepares for the ski trip and other activities they want to avoid. They all eventually decide to bounce out of here and go outside into the snow flurries. Craig also introduces himself to this girl over here who's named Raina. As they walk, they're followed by chaperones because the girls aren't supposed to go anywhere near the boys' cabins, and the boys aren't supposed to go anywhere near the girls' cabins. When they're out in the woods, they dive into the trees to escape the chaperones. They do eventually run away from the chaperones, and they eventually get back to the cabins where they go to hang out. They start kind of going through the other stuff that are inside of the cabins, insulting some of the other dudes. You know, you got Mr. Alternative over here going after the jocks. This guy pulling out some weed, packing a pipe over here, making fun of the one guy for his Old Spice. I wear Old Spice, so I don't really know what the problem is. Maybe I'm a loser. I am a loser. It's okay. I understand. I understand my position in the pecking order, which is dirt is more helpful than me. That's fine. Dirt grows plants, okay? And plants feed people and animals, so. Anyway, they start smoking the pipe, and Craig doesn't want to smoke the pipe, so the dude with the mohawk is like, bruh, why don't you smoke? Are you a pussy? Is it because, biblical reasons? Is it because the Bible says that it's wrong? Why don't you do it? And he's like, is it because you get paranoid when you do it? And he's like, I don't know, I'm not interested. I don't do it. And so then even with these outcasts, we've got Craig feeling outcasted, and the guy is like, bruh, have you even tried it? How do you know you don't like smoking if you don't even freaking try it? Which, I absolutely hate that train of mind. Like, obviously you can discover things that you like that you haven't tried before if you at least try it, but there are also things that you don't need to try to know that you don't like it. Like, I don't think somebody needs to try a religion in order to determine that they don't like a religion. I don't think somebody needs to try sleeping with somebody to determine they don't like sleeping with somebody. I think that's such a ridiculous thing. I don't think you need to try drugs to be like, no, I don't like drugs. I think you could just say, no, I'm not interested in anything that is a hallucinogen or something like that. I don't like the idea of smoking. It's fine. That's not a comment on the book. That's typical peer pressure. That's just a social commentary. Craig clearly doesn't like what's going on, doesn't feel like he fits in, and so he makes up an excuse saying he's meeting a friend and heads out. But he ends up sitting out by himself, watching some of the other kids play. He says that groups scare him, and the appeal of faith was a shepherd who looked for the lost, and he didn't understand the group mentality that seemed to surround him everywhere he went in church. When he went to the auditorium, with all of the games, he didn't get how this meshed with the idea of a shepherd looking for the lost as opposed to sticking with the sheep, because he didn't feel like a member of the flock. The next morning, he runs into Raina at breakfast, who says that she admired him for standing up for himself and not going along with the drugs, just because he didn't feel like he wanted to and not feeling like he had to be pressured into it. And he did so without thinking that he is better than the other rejects. When they get bothered by some other dudes about if she's cutting on line, she says, hey, why don't we get the frick out of here? And he's like, but we haven't had breakfast yet. She's like, that's okay, we can just go. She admits to skipping chapel the night before to go sledding by herself. Then they go out onto the frozen lake, and they're stopped again by a chaperone that's like, you can't be out here. It's a liability. If something happens to you, we're gonna have to pay. So you're not allowed out here. And besides, chapel chapel is in 20 minutes, so, like, go into the rec room and wait until freaking chapel happens, all right? And so then Craig says he needs to go to the bathroom, and then he goes to the bathroom, and these guys over here are talking about how easy it is to get Christian pussy when you're at a Christian camp, at a church camp. And this guy over here with the Nike shirt was scoring a blonde chick with double D's the night before. Hee hee ha 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 ho, look at those holy hand grenades. If you know what I mean. It's just making Craig even more feel like he doesn't fit in here, staring at himself in the mirror, looking at his hair, probably because he's primping himself to go and see Raina outside. He steps out of the bathroom. He doesn't see Raina anywhere, and he looks a little bit lost. So this guy from the church camp comes up to him and asks him if he could help him out. And he's like, no. And he wanders off looking for Raina, though probably more dejected than anything because he already can't find Raina. And he does eventually see her underneath this foosball table or hoops table where she is hiding from everybody, and they just decide that it's a nice place to hide. And she tells them to shh, they're just going to hang out there, and then when chapel time comes, they're just going to stay under there, and they're just going to avoid it. But for the next 20 minutes, she wants to have a nap while this stuff is going on. Then once the chapel bell rings, the area clears out, they keep quiet, and they get left in there, where they just continue to hang out. After the chaperone is done checking to make sure there are no stragglers in there, she's all proud that this is the start of their crusade. They're doing their own thing, and they talk about how the church camp feels vapid, the sermons feel vapid. Neither of them like to sing, though Raina does like to sing, period. She doesn't like to sing for the sermons because it feels fake, and she does have a singing voice, but she feels like her singing voice is sacred and not to be used for something so not mattering. She decides that she's going to go back to sleep, and as she's laying there, he's combing her hair with he's combing her hair with his fingers, and he likes how soft her hair is, and he likes how peaceful this all is, and even the sound of the furnace is just comforting, and everything about the moment is just comforting. Chapter 3 starts with Craig talking about this game they used to play with his brother during winter, where they would walk on the ice-covered snow as fast as they could to see who could get farther before the ice would break and they would sink in. He says that he always beat his brother at the game, but he wished that he was racing himself. However, he always lost because he wasn't in synchrony with the earth. Skip to Craig thinking about being in Sunday school when they are asked to think about what they might be doing in heaven. While the classmates mention stuff like snowboarding, relaxing, football, he says drawing, and the teacher actually laughs at him for his answer. Then she says that life in heaven will be solely devoted to singing, worshiping, and bowing, getting on your knees for God for eternity and loving every second of it, bro. Craig says that he doesn't sing, he can praise God with drawings though, and the teacher is like, what the frick, Craig? Shut up. How are you gonna praise God with freaking drawings? What are you? Skip to Craig going outside a little bit later. It's a winter, and he says that it's too cold to be outside for long to draw. As he walks around, he asks, "Is this what you want from me, God? Me in your ministry? What if I draw Christian cartoons to bring people to the faith?" He goes home to try to draw some Christian drawings, but he just can't bring himself to and walks away disheartened. It's only once he receives a letter from Raina in the mail that he's motivated to put pen to paper again, specifically to respond to her with letters and drawings. The letters he exchanges with Raina are flirting, and they're exchanging gifts as well. This turns into illustrations of him masturbating, which personally I don't think needed to be there in order to express the feelings that he was having for this woman in this form. This is also an area in which this would break the Utah law. And especially this doesn't need to be here if it's targeted to minors. This can definitely exist, and there's really no problem with this existing. It's just, if this is going to be in a school with minors, this is something that could get it flagged. And in the case of Utah's law, this is specifically against one of the policies of the law, even if there are no peepers on the page. He is also groping/fondling his genital pubic area. Then we skip to Craig going to communion and looking as if he feels unworthy for taking communion, but goes through the motions anyway, ignoring the pastor's words, as he's like, if you take this and you're unworthy, then you're damning yourself against the body, you're shaming Christ. And then we immediately go into a sunny man singing hymns. After church, the pastor comes up to Craig and asks if he's thought more about going into ministry. Craig says, I don't know if I really should. I have bad health and I'm sick, and that might get in the way of being of service. At home, he's rolling around sick and depressed that Raina hasn't written him back in a while. Skip to him sitting with his family, and his dad's like, "You're missing a lot of school, boy," as he's coughing. No, I should switch that because they're in Wisconsin. You're missing a lot of school there, boy. We kind of just arrived here. It was a really awkward skip between, you know, how are you doing to cough, 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 to here's some more time skipping to here's dinner. Even though he's missing school, he's getting all of his work done. He's got great grades. He's not failing. So it kind of is a little bit wishy-washy on him saying, I feel like I am losing my soul by doing work at school, but also I have great grades. I just don't need to be at school. It just sounds like he's understimulated at school, honestly, which, fair. He doesn't get along with his classmates, and the socialization aspect of public school can be a distraction if it doesn't benefit you in some way. Mom also says that the winter is hard on Craig's body, and Dad is like, that's, cause you don't eat meat, kiddo. What are ya, vegetarian? What are you doing over there, just eating like a rabbit? And Craig is like, yeah, Dad, I do eat like a rabbit, okay? I don't like McDonald's like you. Well, maybe you would be a stronger man if you did like McDonald's, okay? I'm just saying, maybe try a McMuffin every once in a while. It's got a sausage on it. A sausage is meat. You ever try any breakfast sausage, Craig? I did try a breakfast sausage one time, Dad. I don't really need it. You do need it. Look at how sickly you are, okay? Maybe if you tried a little bit of meat sometime, you wouldn't be so sickly. You'd be more thickly, if you know what I mean. I don't know what you mean, Dad. I mean you'd have more muscle, son. Listen to me. Look at your brother, Phil. He's gonna be 6'3" because he eats his meat, ain't ya? Ain't ya, Phil? Shut up, Dad. That's what I said. Right? Thanks. Phil agrees with me anyway. And we immediately switch to a new snowstorm blowing through the house, the TV saying a flurry is coming. So we're just gonna bull over these family issues that are showing obviously at the table. Because again, like I told you, we're not gonna get any retrospection on like anything that actually matters for this character's journey or his family. His dad doesn't even seem abusive past the beginning where it showed them being thrown into that hole in the wall, the cubby in the wall, the freaking attic it looked like. But also, they don't seem to have any negative feelings about that. I don't know if they made up after that sort of stuff happened, if Dad ever apologized for doing that to them, if Dad never apologized for doing that to them, and they all just pretend it never happened. I don't know. It's kind of weird how much interpersonal stuff this bowls over when it's one, autobiographical, and two, it's 600 pages. So you'd think that we would be able to cover some of this stuff. As Craig is passing out on the couch, a phone rings and his mom tells him that he's got a call from Raina, so he goes to talk to her. She is at a random phone booth in the middle of the snowstorm because her parents are fighting. Her parents are also getting divorced, and she felt the need to get out of the house and was actually driving to his house because she needed somewhere to be, and his house she felt would be the place that would make her feel safe because of how she feels about him. However, she couldn't get all the way there because a bunch of the roads are closed in Wisconsin due to the snowstorm. So they just kind of talk back and forth on the phone. She said that she hasn't been sending him letters because she's been sick, and then they laugh about possibly having the same disease. Then she starts breaking down that she was sick of the fighting. This just makes it so much worse what he ends up doing to her. She says that she's sick of the fighting and she just needed somewhere else to be, and she feels so overly burdened, like school and my supposed friends and taking care of my sister and my other sister and her asshole husband, and I'm so tired and it's freezing out here and you are the only one that she wants anything to do with. And then it just kind of ends there. I miss you so badly. Bro. It cuts this off and just ends the scene. Is that because she starts crying and so then she awkwardly cuts it off? Because then it just has him sitting there in the dark as she gets back to the car. And then he's just, like, in a chipper mood, because he's like, you know, even though Raina's got sad things to say and is in a shitty situation, it made me happy that knowing that she had affections for me. So he's just looking egotistical as frick in this. The only thing that he saw in Raina was validation for himself now at this point. It's making me so... I'm getting more irritated reflecting on this because he's like, I'm not even worried. I'm not even reflecting on how I can help Raina, that I care about Raina, that I'm sad, that she's sad, that is there anything that I can do to help her? No. I'm glad that, you know, she actually does like me, and I have the desire to send her letters again because I know that she does actually care about me since she called me. And then they determine... So after that, he does say that he prays for her, and then he talks to his mom about if he can go and visit Raina for a couple of days. You know, they got a couple extra days coming off this next week. What is it coming up? This is sometime in spring. I'm not entirely sure. That is important to know because of the distance between when this visit happens and the end of the book happens, because then you just... It's just annoying, okay? So he asks his mom if he can go and spend 2 weeks with her. He's like, I do all of my homework just fine. I have great grades, even if I'm not in school all the time. I haven't failed anything. Can I please go? And her parents are Christian. It's a good Christian household. Can I please go? And she's like, oh, they're Christians? Well, that's okay. She does ask where he's going to sleep. And he's like, they have a guest room. It's fine. It's the Christian thing that sells her on letting them go, though. And then she's like, also, I'm not the one that is the final decision, BT Dubs. You have to talk to your father. He is the one that makes the final call. And so then Craig goes and asks his dad, and his dad is like, okay, you can go see your friend, but you have to not skip school up until then. You have to get good grades, and you have to eat meat. And so up until then, that all happens, though he only pretends to eat meat. And then they agree. And so what happens is her family, her dad is driving halfway from Michigan to pick him up, and then his mom is driving halfway from Wisconsin to drop him off. And so they meet in this parking lot, and they embrace, and the parents meet each other, and then they get into the car, and he is driven off. And so then as they're driving back to her place, Dad is asking all about Craig over here, and is first talking about the winters, and how they're just made different in the winters, and how the winters prepare them to deal with extra hardships and endurance, have different kinds of endurance than the people that don't have to deal with the northern stuff. And he's asked if he has any hobbies that are like skiing or snowboarding, and Craig's like, I don't have the kind of money for that. And then as they're driving, they pass by some kids climbing up a snowy mountain, and the guy is like, that is inspiring, seeing those kids struggle up that hill over there. You know, being an adult is like struggling up a hill forever and ever and ever, and you never go anywhere. It's like just, there is no point in life. You're just forever struggling up a snowy hill. BT Dubs, what are your career plans after high school, Craig? Which, you know, it's great to hear this guy as an adult over here say how useless the future is. But pretty much everything, the conversation is more or less owned by the dad over here, talking about politics and stuff, while Craig and Raina are over here looking at the windows, sharing glances, pointing stuff out, and stealing whispers between each other as much as they can. Once they get to the house, Raina and Craig are sent inside to unpack, while Dad is going to go pick up her adopted brother and sister, Ben and Laura. Raina also says, the first thing that she says once they get into the house is that she has made him a gift, a very important gift. So she has him sit down at the table, cover his eyes to get it, and what she actually made him was a handmade quilt, which she also sewed parts of her baby blanket into. He says that it's sacred and that he is so honored to have this thing that he wants to repay her with something. He keeps bugging her is, what can I do for you? What can I do to repay you for this? And she's like, there's nothing. It's a gift. There's nothing. He's like, I need to repay you. And she's like, okay, I can think of one thing that you can do for me. So she shows him her bedroom. And then she says, I want you to paint a spot on my wall because you're an artist. And so you send me letters with art on them. And I think your art is great. And so I want you to put something on the wall right here next to my bed just for me and paint it. And he's like, really? That's so permanent. She's like, yup, and that's what I want it to be. And they get interrupted then by her dad coming home with her siblings. This is Laura. She's 19. She's older than the two of them. And then her other sibling is an older brother who's 26 named Ben. The two adopted siblings are both mentally disabled in different ways. Laura is later referred to as retarded in the narrative as how Craig describes her as. And Ben is described as having Down syndrome, just to summarize that for you. Just to summarize that. So when Laura comes in, she's super excited to see both Raina and to meet Craig. However, Ben doesn't want to come in. He's kind of broody and feels like his relationship with Raina is being stepped on by Craig being there because Ben and Raina are very close, since Raina defended Ben in school. So Dad has to go out there and try to get Ben to come inside and to stop being pouty. But once he does come inside, he goes into his own room. Meanwhile, you just got Laura over here jumping all over Craig. Ben just walking through, ignoring Craig. The dad offers to feed them chicken pot pie for dinner, but both Raina and Craig are vegetarians, so they make themselves sandwiches. After dinner, the dad says goodnight to Laura, and he's gonna go say goodnight to Ben because since they're in the middle of a divorce, he's staying in a one-bedroom apartment while his wife stays here, and he just comes over to help with the kids and to help with taking care of the house during the evening, and then she comes back after her job when he is not there. So there's Dad leaving, and then Laura is upset because she has to go to bed and she's afraid that Craig won't be there, and she's very fond of Craig. And so then Raina and Craig assure Laura that they will be there in the morning, that he will be there in the morning, and Raina pulls Laura off to bed. While Raina puts her sister to bed, Craig returns to Raina's room and reads the Bible, wanting to keep up the habit even while he's visiting. That is his nightly routine of reading the Bible. He starts reading a story about Jesus returning and going through a crowd, and a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years touched him, and Jesus turns around and is like, what the frick? Who just touched me? You can't tell me that he is not looking offended in this. I don't think that Jesus was actually offended. I think he was startled, but that's kind of a mood right there. And this ends up making Craig feel called out because he's laying sprawled out on Raina's bed, and he feels like he's being disrespectful to it and disrespectful to her room. After fixing the bed, he goes and sits in the corner where he then notices the same picture of Jesus on the wall as his parents had in their room. And this specifically connects him to a memory of being set on his parents' bed while his mom went to get his dad, and they came in to talk to him about some drawings that he did that were found on the bus. Not only was he drawing some war items, but he also drew some pictures of naked women. Because if you're an artist, there's no way that you're getting around drawing nude people at least once. Like, it happens. It happens. And so the parents are like, look, we're not mad at you. We are sad. And Jesus is sad, and you're making everybody sad by sinning. So can you please stop sinning? I mean, look at this. Look at Jesus and see how sad he is. He is crying because you are drawing lewd women. Think about your sins. Think about your hand and the sins that you are making your hand do. And then obviously, look at this poor kid being creeped on by this lewd woman he drew. And he doesn't know what to do with himself. Then he's surrounded by lewd women, and they all look like Raina in various situations. Then she comes in, breaks his mental focus, says her mom got home, and so she's going to introduce him to her mom, who is having a breakdown in the dining room or is tired. It looks like a breakdown because she's also popping pills all the time. But so she's super enthusiastic. She's like, you draw beautiful things. My daughter talks about you all the time. Have you seen the house? Let me show you around the house. Here is the guest room that you can stay in, and let me know if you need anything. You can do things. And then she starts unloading on this teenager that she just met about the divorce and how things are hard for Raina and what's going on with her husband. And, you know, it's been difficult for a while. And it's just, honey, I think you need some friends, okay? If you're talking to a 17-year-old about your divorce, your ongoing divorce, you need friends, okay? Your own age. Mom says that she got more groceries. She checks the dishwasher to make sure her husband loaded it and complains about it. And then she says that she needs to talk to Raina before she goes to bed, which is going to be soon. So Craig goes off to his room to go and continue reading the Bible, while Raina transcribes notes from her mother to her dad about what she wants her dad to do the next day. And I don't know why the mom over here can't just write those notes herself, but she's just like, you know, tell your dad, Laura's off school, Ben needs this, you need to do that, this needs to get done, I'm not doing this, counseling sessions are over because they're not helping our marriage, and I don't freaking care about it anymore. Like, that's all that's happening in this section. And the Bible story that Ben is reading about is when Jesus addressed at the house of Jairus about someone having a dead daughter. And Jesus is like, don't be afraid, she is dead. And then he goes to visit the dead daughter and says that no, she is only sleeping. And then when he left, the child was awake. So then he goes into the bathroom to do his nightly things and looks through the cupboards. And then once Raina's mother is done talking to Raina, she puts the list on the fridge. And then Raina and Craig sit together again in Raina's room, and Craig wants to touch her, but he's kind of afraid to touch her because of his sinning thoughts. So they lean against each other, they talk until they can't talk anymore, and then he goes back to his room, his guest room, where he is very uncomfortable in the guest room because I assume it's one of his first time. Well, it is his first time visiting another house like this. Two, it is a sibling's old room. Like, this is Raina's older sister's old room that was converted into a room. So it's filled with dolls that make him feel like he's being stared at, and the bed is stiff. I have been there. It does suck. I've been in that place so bad that I went and got an air mattress so I could just sleep on the floor in the living room instead of in the guest room because, like, that was when I was house sitting, okay? It happened. So the next chapter is called Static, and it opens with Craig having had difficulty sleeping all night, and he doesn't know what time it is because there are no windows on the side of the house that actually allow light in to tell him what time it is. Raina's brother is out in the living room talking to him. Ben sulks off as soon as Craig comes out, and he learns that he has slept until noon. Raina says it's okay that Craig walked off and is kind of moody. He didn't ruin anything. The two of them had all morning to hang out together. And then she asks if Craig wants to be with her as they go and get Laura ready for school. So he eats his breakfast. He does his morningly stuff. Dad gets there to help take care of the kids and do what he needs to do. And so then Raina's over here taking care of her older sister, Laura, helping her get dressed, combing her hair. And as she's getting her hair combed, Craig is thinking how she doesn't even look retarded as she's getting her hair combed. She looks kind of mystical, but also, or rather, I realized that outward characteristics we use to identify mental disabilities have less to do with physical features than the motor coordinations. Laura's skin was flawless under the scrutiny of the noontime light. Her eyes were bright and lips full, and all of the features were set in harmonious design of a child. I was jealous. When she held still, Laura was absolutely beautiful. The dad comes in, sighing at the note that Mother left, disappointed that the counseling sessions are over because he thought that they were doing something, but apparently not. He asks Craig to help him load wood into the back of the truck, and Craig helps. Dad also vents about what's going on with the marriage. Again, I think you both need to have friends. If you don't, you need to find someone appropriate to talk to that's more appropriate than your daughter's 17-year-old friend. But one of the things he says is that he doesn't believe in divorce, so they shouldn't be getting divorced. God doesn't believe in divorce. Everybody is upset about the divorce. And he keeps telling Craig about how he and his wife had been screaming at each other like all the time, and it wasn't good for the kids, so now he's living in an apartment temporarily while they work things out. Now, I might say, like, why are you doing this, bro, to this guy that you just met yesterday? But dude probably has no friends and is just inappropriately buddying his adult spousal problems with a teenager. Or it didn't happen in this story. It just needed a way to quickly tell the audience what was going on with Raina's parents in a way that was the most natural for it to do. So as you can see, like, these are some of the things that make me question the validity of something being autobiographical as opposed to just being more of an interpretation journal that pushes stuff together. Because autobiographical to me says as close to actually happened as you can possibly remember / write. And so when you start getting creative with it, but maybe I'm having too specific of an interpretation of the words autobiographical. Once the truck is loaded, Raina and Craig get to hang out again, and the two of them drive into the mountains, lay in the snow while looking up at the sky. When Craig asks if she's hungry, she says, "Yes, I am hungry, but not for food." Not really for food. He talks about how he and his brothers used to see little static lights all over the bed and in the house, and they'd share those cool things together. He tried to tell his parents about it, but his parents were like, yeah, that's not anything special. It's just static electricity clinging to the fabric. Then he and his brother would go back up to the room, and they wouldn't be able to find any of them, like his parents just killed the magic. Raina says, just another example of adults transforming your magic into static. Craig also says when he was a kid that he would plug his own eyelashes out of stress, and she says, wow, that's such a wasted wish. And so then he asks what, and she's like, when you pluck your eyelashes out, you're supposed to take a wish. And so then he plucks his eyelash, she plucks her eyelash, and then they kiss each other in the snow. They continue laying in the snow, saying that they feel like they're a million miles an hour and getting lost in this pattern of everything that is happening. As you can see, we got all these major patterns everywhere. Chapter 5 starts with the two of them going back to Raina's house where her brother-in-law is waiting for them and saying that Dad and the kids went off to church that night and that the dad was kind of disappointed that Raina wasn't at home to go to church. However, the brother-in-law is like, so we brought this food and we were going to ask you if you could watch our baby because your sister and I have an important dinner to go to. So it's kind of weird that he is like, we were expecting you to be here so that we could ask you to watch our child, but also this is a normal church night that Dad would have expected you to be at church at. Kind of weird. Another small thing. Craig also actually brought McDonald's, and they're like, we don't eat meat, but that's fine. Are there fries in there? And so then they're eating the fries. Raina does accept to watch the baby, so her older sister Julia is like, oh, okay, here you are, here is the baby, take care of him, here's this stuff. She's telling him that they have an important client tonight, where all the things are, that she asks her husband how her makeup looks, and he just kind of ignores her, being like, we're freaking late, so she ends up asking Raina how she looks, and she's like, you look great, so they leave, and then they're taking care of the baby together. It was like, as soon as the sister saw Raina, she thrusted the baby into Raina's arms, and the sister just rejected everything going going on. So that shows you how much expectation is on Raina and how much they're all using Raina. So she's taking care of all of her siblings, BT dubs. While doing this, the sister also says, look, you need to take care of the baby. Her name is Sarah. She's been in daycare for 10 hours and I need to go. The sister's husband kept tapping his watch, so, they leave. Important to know that the sister and the Bill both refer to the baby as the baby, and she's the one that says Sarah. So Raina asks Craig if he's ever been interested in being a father, and he says no, he's too irresponsible, which, also fair. He's only 17. That's kind of a big thing to ask somebody at this age who hasn't had to deal with that situation. The fact that she is already so motherly kind of puts a lot of perspective of like how much responsibility has been on her, that she's kind of had to grow up very quickly and she feels like she has to take care of things. I know what it feels like to feel like you have to take care of things, especially during the family fallout during divorce. As Raina changes the baby's diaper, she's talking about her family. She's like, look, the baby likes the color of your eyes, they're so pretty. And he's like, your eyes are so pretty. And then the baby starts crying, so she's like, oh, the baby probably needs its diaper changed. So they go into the living room and she starts changing the baby while telling him about her family. She says that her sister has only been married for a year and they're already talking about divorce, and that means they probably got married because she was pregnant, because she's already got a baby. Or it was immediately after the marriage that the baby was created. This is also when she says that her parents adopted her younger siblings as a sort of way to thank God for the healthy family that her parents were given. This is where Raina says that her brother is 26 and her sister is 19. Raina says that her sister still wears diapers and crawls around. That's where she is still at developmentally. She's stunted more than she should, and it makes her parents feel like they're failures. Quote, Laura was rescued from a family that abused her and moved to a family that pampered and sheltered her. In some cases, overprotective parents are just as harmful as neglectful ones. This is an extreme case of overprotective parents. I don't know how Laura would end up how she is, but both Raina and Julie seems self-sufficient. Raina explains that her parents probably worried way too much about their kids, that they neglected themselves and each other, which led to the marriage kind of dissolving and being in the state that it is in. After the baby is sleeping, the two of them go and look at a photo album, and Raina gives Craig a picture of herself from it as she is showing it to him. We'll see it right here. This is the photo that she is going to give him. As over here, she shows her sister going through a rebellious phase as a teenager and says that her sister always felt a need to be responsible for a family, and so she married the first guy who came her way. Raina says that all she wants to do after graduating is shower Sarah with the love that she deserves so that she doesn't suffer. She asks Craig what his plans are for graduation, and he says that he doesn't know, and he's not sure if he ever will. They're getting really cozy with each other when Mom suddenly comes home. She's moody and she's asking if the other kids are in bed yet. She asks Raina if she skipped school today and to try to get some hours in tomorrow at least. Everyone gets home at about the same time. Her sister and brother-in-law, and then her dad and her siblings, and then they all kind of just go in different directions. Then we get a flashback to school where her adopted brother is being picked on, being called a mongoloid and a downy, when Raina comes in to tell the bullies off, which includes yelling at them that Ben is so strong that he could cover the walls in them. Raina pulls Ben away and says, let's ditch these losers. Craig realizes that Ben gives him the side eye every time he's around, and they hug goodnight. Craig is realizing just how close Raina is with her siblings, which is very different than he is with his sibling, where he has a much more distant relationship with his brother, and he doesn't protect his brother like it seems Raina does with her siblings. I'm assuming that this actually makes him feel bad, much more than the book implies that he does, as he remembers, again, the babysitter taking his little brother into the other room, and again, we have another reference to likely molestation. Craig says, quote, since a child, I was always displaced from my body. I saw it as only a receptacle for my soul. But while uncomfortable with its weakness and inadequacies, I was even more terrified of the notion of growing up. Older people were such a foreign beast, especially high schoolers, with their lumbering, awkward flesh, body odor, foul mouths, curdled acne, first sprouting facial hair, and swollen sexual organs. This is where we get another area that breaks into the Utah law, where the bully has an erect penis on the screen. And it says, I couldn't fathom that the soul trapped in my child body would be transplanted to a grotesque adolescent counterpart. It's also interesting, and I don't usually make notations like this, but at the same time, in 2 pages, it has been the contraction and not the possessive twice. That doesn't usually happen in traditionally published books, especially that commonly. He continues saying, "Now here I was, a teenager with pimples and pubic hair, and all I could do was accept my predicament, was transfer my fears to the next stage of development. I'll never be an adult." This is another thing that makes me feel like this book has more to do with Zoomers and millennials that are struggling in adulthood and sort of reflecting back than it is applicable to high schoolers or middle schoolers. We'll get into that a little bit more at the end, but I sort of mentioned it with Flamer at the beginning. Anyway, after all of this, we switch over to Raina and Craig laying on the ground together, and she asks if he believes in God. He says yes, and she does too, but not in heaven. She says that she doesn't believe in the future, cursed or perfect, and asks if baby Sarah were to die tonight, where would she go? Because she's too young to perform the acceptance of Jesus Christ. And so, where would that even go? Does she have a grace period? And Craig is like, well, I would think that she has a grace period. And then she's like, well, what about the mentally challenged? Do they get a grace period? Because they don't get a chance to accept to be saved either, right? The two of them continue laying on the ground together, getting cozy, about to kiss when Raina says, "Oh, it's time for bed," and pulls away. He says that he doesn't want the day to end yet, and so she invites him to sleep with her, beside her, in the bed throughout the night, and they will just instead set an alarm to get up at 6 o'clock, so then he can switch to the guest room before the other people get up, so nobody realizes that he was in the bedroom with her all night. Or, a couple of hours before everybody gets up. Not all night, since it's already, 2:10. They set an alarm for early, and he can go back to his room. After this, they go their separate ways. Well, she goes to the bathroom. He stays in the room to change into their jammies. And all the time, he's reminding himself of memory verses about lust and temptation and how you're going to burn in hell as he gets ready. And he's like, oh no. And then she comes in saying that he looks great. And he thinks that she looks like an angel in her outfit. And then they get into bed. He wakes up at 6 o'clock, goes to the guest room without a hitch, though he is super lonely in there and misses the contours of her body, misses every piece of perfection that is her body, and just didn't want to be away from her. He thanks God for creating Raina so beautifully, so perfectly, and sending her to him the way that she is, as perfect as she is, a temple with hair spilling over her temples, pressed against her. I can hear eternity, hollow, lonely spaces, and currents that churn ceaselessly, and the falling snow welcomes the fallen snow with a whispered hush. She is yours. She is perfect. And then he falls asleep holding the blanket that she made him. When he gets up in the morning, she's waiting for him, greets him with a kiss, a hug, dresses him, and they go outside to play in the snow in their pajamas, but with coats on. The next chapter starts with Craig and his little brother laying in bed, and his little brother says, "Psst, Craig, I peed on you." And Craig is like, no, you didn't. And so then when he turns away to try to sleep again, his little brother is like, look, I peed on you again. And he did it with just one drop, but it was him licking his finger. And so then when Craig turns around to be like, no, you didn't, he pulls the blanket down, and Phil has his penis out. And so then Craig goes, well, you peed on me, then I'm gonna pee on you. And he rips his pants off and then forces Phil on the ground to pee on Phil. And then Phil starts fighting back to pee on Craig, blasts Craig off the bed with his wee-wee and his pee-pee, and then pees on him on the floor. Mom hears the noise, comes in to see the boys covered in piss, and then drags them to the bathroom so that they can clean themselves. And Craig is out here thinking how this is the first shower that he has ever taken, and it is one of shame, and he can't wash the shame off of him. And this is supposed to be a rite of passage, an initiation into adulthood, taking your first shower, but it is shrouded in piss and shame. I just gotta say, did we need Pissgate over here? Like, what did it actually add to the story? To the thesis of the story, I should say. What is even the thesis of the story? What is the main drive of the story? Obviously, we got some level of relationship with his brother, and obviously we got some part of his relationship with Raina. Most of the story does take place with his relationship with Raina. It does describe itself as being about his first love. However, what does this have to do with any of that? I wish it had better mixing of the two things. Because Raina does play a role in him realizing how much he's neglected his brother, and then helps him get a better relationship with his brother. That comes in later, you'll see. It then jumps straight into him being taken to a party that Raina was invited to, and it's got all of these dudes doing drugs, alcohol, just making him feel like he doesn't fit in at all and wondering why he's here when all he wants to do is hang out with Raina alone. As soon as they get greeted because she's actually a really popular person at her school, the dude, one of her friends, gives them both beers, and he's like, I don't really do that, and the guy is like, what, you don't drink? And he's already feeling like he doesn't fit in here. He's like, oh, I'm already sticking out. And so then Raina is pulled away from him to go and talk to her other friends. Everybody is already aggressive at her. Everybody's already being aggressive at him. And again, he's just like, I would just rather be painting the wall while she types and we just do our thing together. Which then flashbacks to them being in her room. And he's like, I don't know what I should paint on your wall, and I don't want to make a mistake. Like, what if I make a mistake? It's going to be permanent. She's like, you'll come up with something. He's like, I can't come up with anything. I don't even need to paint anymore. I'm around my muse. Like, I don't need to create. I am with you. So he picks up the brush to attempt paint, and then just gets a little drop, and then he panics, and she's like, bro, a mistake is better than nothing. Just try it. And then he says, what if I ended up a mistake to her? Because at this moment, he feels a wall separating the two of them. But it's like, didn't he just say that he preferred this? He feels more distant than she does. Like, you could be doing your own thing, and it is not a problem if you just have a little bit of focus time, okay? And he says, I felt lonely again, and then use that loneliness as my fuel. And so then he draws a picture of the two of them in a tree on the wall, where they're together, and all of the leaves are made up of her poems, which is why the tree still has poems, because she writes those poems. At the end of it all, he's looking at her poems, and he says, I love them, and works himself into telling her that I love you, and she says it back. We then randomly switch over here to Raina's dad, where Raina nor Craig are, just to see him picking up Ben, and Ben not coming out because when he was supposed to, and then throwing a fit when he gets home, saying that he is not retarded. Dad treats him like he's retarded, and he's just very frustrated. He also doesn't want the divorce. He doesn't want his parents to get divorced because the Bible says not to, and clearly the divorce happening with the family is causing issues with the kids, as tend to happen with a lot of divorces. But this is just a weird perspective on the scene, considering Craig isn't in the scene, and this book is autobiographical. Then we get another weird jump cut where it is then to Craig being taken to school with Raina, and this is actually the day before the party, because this is at the time that she actually gets invited to the party. So she shows up. The school is like 5 times bigger than his school, so he is super impressed. She goes to class, he walks with her, she gets an out at class and comes back out to meet him, and after bouncing out of class, she runs into one of her friends who is like, hey, Raina, are you coming to the party tonight? And she's like, bruh, and he's like, more friends come over, and they're like, he's like, she is so popular, what the frick? And so then they go and hang out, and he sees just how popular she is and how many people know her. And then we skip back to where this chapter initially started, which is him at the party. I don't really get the ordering of this chapter. It's really weird. But he is not fitting in anywhere. Another one of her friends comes over because Raina is going to introduce her to Craig, and she says, hey, this is my friend Craig. The friend over here is like, wow, you look like brother and sister. Are you two an item? And she's like, that would be so incestuous. And then they go outside. Well, then he leaves the party because he is just overwhelmed, doesn't want to be in there, doesn't enjoy parties, and so he's taking a breather and waiting for Raina to come and find him. He kind of just wishes that it could be the two of them, but he also feels like he's seeing a different side of Raina by getting to experience her the way that he is during this trip. During the night, they're very close and intimate, and it's just the two of them being very close, but during the day, they have to deal with other parts of her family, and she looks like she's smoking in that other panel, and it just feels like they're at arm's length during the day, which kind of makes sense because she's doing other things during the day as well, other expectations. He says that he feels like underneath the water, they are struggling bodies together, but above the water, there's a current pulling them apart, so they're parallel, but not together. This skips back to church, telling everyone that all relationship labels will eventually not exist in heaven. This is something that Craig is thinking about as he waits for Raina to leave the party as he's standing out in the cold. Raina finally comes to meet him and then is driving them home. She asks Craig why he said, I love you, and he said that he meant it. And she's like, but we barely know each other. And he says, that means that there is a lot to discover. And she says, everything ends eventually. It denigrates. It's not strange for her to think that when both her parents and her sister are having relationship issues. But it seems like something that should have a longer conversation, a deeper conversation in the future, you know, maybe tomorrow when she's probably less drunk. Because she's been drinking. Who knows if she's been doing drugs. But it feels like this should be something that they talk about a little longer, though I also think that it is above Craig's head, being a 17-year-old, to talk about this deep of relationship. But you'd think that it would be something that he could pursue if he really was interested in that. She obviously felt something for him because she made a handmade quilt, and I think she's just scared. The two of them end up sitting together, overlooking the town, and then they eventually drive home. This chapter opens with Raina asking Craig to sleep with her tonight. Then it immediately goes into him saying that things were enthusiastic when he first arrived, but were now petering out, and he felt a distance between them as he learned about her world. Her sister and brother-in-law are planning to go on vacation and ask Raina to watch the little baby, Sarah, as they go. Not to the grandparents, BT dubs, which whatever, they're in turmoil, but you're still asking the 17-year-old who apparently has school, who's not going to be able to go to school because of that. So I hope she checked that with the parents. Craig and Raina are getting cozy. Dad also attempts to say goodnight to Ben, and Ben is just distant and not trying anything. Dad's also making sure that the dishwasher is loaded and running before he says goodnight to Raina and Craig, and then he leaves. Then you got Raina and Craig getting cozy and talking about temptation and the Garden of Eden while locking lips. It is such a weird little jump. Like, the build keeps starting and then getting interrupted, and then there's like nothing, and they don't deal with whatever it started, and they just switch things. Especially when this last chapter ended with her more or less rejecting him in multiple ways. She friend-zoned him in front of her friends, then told him how could he love her when he doesn't know who she is, and now they're like back into super being into each other. Her feelings of doubt and fear make sense, but then we just skip and it's completely different and it's gone and they're on pursuit again. Once Mom comes in, she says that she's going straight to bed. Raina says that she doesn't believe in Eden because women get all of the blame for humanity. Craig tells her at least Adam and Eve were both punished together, and God had the decency to wait until Adam sinned so that they could be punished together because shame is easier to carry when you bear it together. They brush their teeth and Raina asks him to stay with her. She's stressed out about him going home, probably stressed about being alone again in this house since he's helped her chill out over this time, and hasn't had to perform as much for her parents or family because she's had him around. He says that they should get a van so that they can live together, and she says she can't leave. Her siblings need her, her parents need her family is falling apart, and she can't just go. She can't just leave. She asks him not to go home and to stay here with her to take care of Sarah and Laura. And just some of their moments together. You got the mouth, you got the lip in the mouth over here. She asks him to drop out of school, says they should drop out of school together, and he should stay there to help take care of Sarah and Laura. Quote, her tone wasn't serious. We both knew that nothing existed outside of that moment. Wouldn't that mean that her tone was serious because she was thinking, like, there is nothing but right now? Am I just reading that weird? She asks him to stay with her in bed, and he does. They tell stories to each other about what they used to do in childhood. Him was sharing his bed with his brother and pretending that they were shipwrecked at one time. She talked about preparing her parents' bed for fake dinner parties that she would invite her siblings to and her stuffed animals to, and then they had a pet monkey at one point that became too much for them and was quickly returned to the pet store after it was determined they couldn't take care of it. The two of them do end up having sex, which would end up being another thing against it that breaks the Utah state law regarding these books. So in case you were wondering, I think that's 3 for 3 on all 3 of the things that would end up with this being taken out. He says how he is head over heels for her and he feels like he belongs here and nowhere else, and the image of Jesus on the wall is smiling down at him. I mean, Jesus over here might as well. He just need his thumb up. Good. I'm proud of you, buddy. Proud of you. The next day, Dad's walking around looking for Ben to see if Ben will help him with work, and Ben won't. He won't even answer. So then he's like, you know what, you just had the day off. He goes and looks for Craig, doesn't find Craig, goes to see if Laura is sent to school, and he ends up finding Raina and Craig sleeping together in Raina's room. He's gonna say something, but he ends up leaving without saying anything, goes to sit in the living room, look at his family photo, and cries. Chapter 8 starts with Phil and Craig's parents giving Phil his own room, as they've just changed the playroom into a bedroom and then got Phil his own bed, and then says that Craig can stay in the other room with the other bed because it's bigger and the room is also bigger. As excited as the boys are for their own space, they're used to sharing space, so they're very uncomfortable being left alone. So for the first while, they make excuses to go join the other one in the other one's bed until they eventually decide they're too old to do that anymore and they get comfortable being alone. Back into modern time, with Craig visiting Raina, they're walking during their last couple of days together, and she's asking about his brother, and he's saying that he's not really close with him. She asks if he still draws, and he's like, I don't really know, actually. My brother and I just aren't really close. And she's like, that's kind of weird. I mean, you guys live together, and you guys aren't really close. And this actually gets him thinking about how distant he is from his brother. Mom over here is talking to Raina about how she's almost graduating high school and then she's going to go and have her future, and the marriage is breaking up and all of that. And the last day that they had left, Raina was sick and spent most of the time in bed, which he didn't know what to do with, so he just kind of kept her company, stayed at the house, stayed around. They hung out, and she is very sorry about, being ill. She does help him pack his bags, though. And Laura is really upset that he is leaving. He promises that he's going to be back real soon. It's just going to be for a short while that he's going to be gone. Don't you dare. Don't you worry about it up in there, okay? It's just a little bit. It's just a Wisconsin boys. Gotta head home. It's going to be fine. Then, just like before, Dad drops him off at the halfway point. Mom picks him up. He talks about how beautiful she is when he's looking at her at that moment. And they hug for a very long time. Once she leaves and he talks to his mom, she asks, was that girl really just a friend? And he's like, well, she's more than a friend. And Mom is like, if I'd have known that, I wouldn't have let you stay there for 2 weeks. And so they then get back to the house, and after he puts his stuff in his room, he actually goes to visit with his brother and asks his brother what game he's playing, says it looks interesting, asks his brother if he's still drawing, and then asks to see some of his brother's drawings. Oh, and he also gets this note. He gets this note that was folded into his blanket that said, I love you too. So he's got that from her. That confirmation and this excitement here. You're going to be so upset with how this goes. I mean, maybe you won't be. I'm irritated. So he visits with his brother, reconnects with his brother, compliments his brother, sleeps with that blanket, wakes up at 6 in the morning like the last couple of weeks, where he was getting up early to go to the guest room, and is just feeling super lonely and trapped. And then over time, you get this mixture of talking about Socrates, as well as these phone calls with Raina, where he says that he misses her, and she says that she is so busy, and she tells him that when he says, I love you, she says he is intimidating to talk to. This is paralleled with the discussion of Socrates being in the stocks and looking at shadows, thinking what he saw was the truth and he believed lies. She says that she's got too much going on right now, too much stress and pressure, and needs space between her siblings and her parents, and trying to make sure that she graduates high school. There's just a lot going on. This is in the spring of senior year, by the way, so it's coming up. It's not a long space of time. The change here feels like, for me, it came out of nowhere, as the rest of the relationship, while some of it was up and down, we got to see it say, I love you, just before it's, oh wait, no, never mind. And I feel like we missed so much stuff between things. And there's also no extra introspection from Craig's perspective either. It just does this, where he's like, well, now I'm just disaffected. Now I just, oh, I don't care. Even though 2-3 pages ago, I looked totally fine. The fact that it came out of nowhere also cheapens the relationship, the development. This is going to lead into the climactic moment of the novel. I know he's a teenager, so he's got zero chill. He says, I love you, but he's got zero chill, zero understanding for her and her plight, even after seeing how much was on her plate that she was dealing with. At church, the people are asking him if he's prepared for college, what he's going to do. Church is worried that he'll start art school and look at naked people and become gay from art school. Someone else comes over and says, oh, if you don't study art, it'll happen anyway. Even if you take any art classes whatsoever, you're going to end up seeing things that you shouldn't see. It happens in normal colleges. I had this friend who went to a clay class, and they saw a guy make boobies out of clay, and then while he was getting critiqued, he was licking the nip-nops of the babalas. And it just happens. See, homosexuality, it happens. The next logical step to art is homosexuality. So, it turns out that this guy right here hasn't actually talked to his sibling who went to art school in 10 years. And, he's, been, just keeping his distance so not to catch the homosexualism from, his, artistic brother, apparently. This is now when I get irritated. This is where it takes the worst turn. So it skips to him being at home. He calls Raina, like, immediately. You've got, don't go to art school. Don't go to art school. Goes here. Hugging the blanket. Calls up Raina. She says that she has confirmed that she is graduating high school in 3 weeks. And then it just has, congratulations. Thank you, Raina. Yeah? Raina, I'm calling to say goodbye. Goodbye? Where are you going? I'm not going anywhere. And then he takes everything that she gave him. All of the letters, all of the clothing, all of the gifts, everything. And dumps it into this barrel. And burns it all, including the childhood photos that Raina gave. You could at least send her back the childhood photos. But, like, that came out of nowhere. He just ended it out of nowhere. You didn't have to stop being her friend. You didn't have to do this. And then it just, we get this, everything burned, zero introspection on anything in this, why he did this, why he felt so betrayed, when previously he was pretending that he showed any sort of compassion towards her, that he kept saying, I love you. And then he goes, then we go ahead and skip 2 years, and he says, oh, I lived there and I moved out when I was 20. You just burn everything, and then we go dark for 2 years until you decide to move out, and then he's like, oh yeah, and then I wasn't a Christian anymore, and I kept that from my parents. You're just gonna skip over all of that? And then he says, you know, I'm not gonna tell mom and dad that I'm not a Christian. Not that it's a problem to them. They'd still love me. They'd pray for me because the salvation of their children matters. But I just, I don't want to explain it to them. And I don't think that it really matters. I'll tell them when the time is right. But, yeah. So as they're walking, they also talk about, hey, remember this hole in the ground that this cave that we found when we were kids, and we went and played in it, and every day we came back, and the hole was smaller until it was gone. But us being together and experiencing it together let us know that we weren't crazy and helped it be a memory there together. He says, how else do I know that it was real and not merely a dream if there wasn't somebody to experience it with? And then it ends with him imagining, or somebody, that could be Raina's dad, painting over the picture that he drew on the wall in Raina's room. We don't know. It is just the imagination of that. But I just gotta say, like, this book is about these big things. His brother's relationship, his first love, and his disillusionment with Christianity. And you just skip over all of that. You just throw it in there with no introspection, no thought, no show, and you skip time. And then we get to this last section that's footnotes that is bizarrely added, that adds to the bizarre pacing, because now it goes back in time to say what caused his disillusionment, which he was reading the Bible, and there were just too many authors of the Bible that he started questioning the Bible and going, I don't believe this. I think that you have too many cooks in the kitchen of the holy word to make the holy word actually be legitimate. And so he just distanced himself from the Bible. Then he also skips more, saying that his brother is getting married. So he moved to the city. He got a day job in the city, started checking people out in the city, only went back to visit his parents like 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years. One was during Christmas, one was for his brother's graduation, and one was for his brother's marriage. And his brother is marrying a geologist who got them a reception at the museum. You got, the sister-in-law talking to him about the rocks and the fossils while ignoring the Christian nonsense at the museum. You got him sitting down with his dad talking about how global warming is bullshit during Christmas. And the last section of the book is just him visiting during Christmas. So they're waiting for the other brother to show up. So he's just wandering around, the neighborhood where he grew up and all of that, waiting and not telling his parents that he's no longer a Christian, because that's in there too. And then he's going through the cupboards randomly. Like, you see this. So he's just sitting outside, staring. Look, I'm disappointing my parents, staring up at the sky. Then he's randomly, look at this pacing. It's so sloppy. So then he's in the cubby hole looking through random things, goes and gets this bag that you never saw him put in there. That is the blanket, by the way. He didn't burn the blanket, thank goodness. And so he pulls that out, goes through other boxes, finds his old Bible, has another random reference to Jesus in the Bible, pulls out the blanket, thinks about how much work that Raina put into the blanket, thinks about having sex with her. Just get these pages of it happening and then it ending. And then it ends in its attempt to be deep, but it's really just annoying because Craig is so freaking shallow. I'm talking about the character Craig in this. I'm not even talking about the author because I don't freaking care. I'm talking about the book. And it says, quote, "Sometimes upon waking up, the residual dream can be more appealing than the reality, and one is reluctant to give it up. For a while, you feel like a ghost, not fully materialized and unable to manipulate your surroundings, or else it is a dream that haunts you. You wait with the promise of the next dream, but the act of waking is dependent on remembering. We use ritual as a mnemonic device, holiday as a ritual with meaning, and the seasons as increments of measurements." All while saying this, we just get to different holiday things going on. Craig departs from the group to go and walk in the snow all by himself because no one wants to go with him. And we end... See, we get this going on. Just like so. And we end on this quote, "How satisfying it is to leave your mark on a blank surface, to make a map of movement, no matter how temporary." I don't know, it just reads narcissism to me. It didn't actually do anything to build something, to be different. It just wanted him to do something, even if it was pointless. Like marking Raina counted, like leaving that thing on Raina. And he goes, you know, maybe I was Raina's mistake. Yeah, probably, because she was relying on you and she was busy for a little bit. And you were like, you know, screw this. Like, screw you, Craig. This could have been a strong ending where he really reflected on things that he did, but because there is no introspection on any of this, he's just like, you know what? I am great. I am great, and I like doing things because it makes me feel great. And bringing up the blanket to do like 5-6 pages of sex randomly and not even think about who he was to Raina or who Raina was to him or how Raina affected him in his adult life when clearly he hasn't gotten into another relationship yet, hasn't even bothered to try to call her, like, what's going on here? But we don't get to talk about any of that. Anyway, getting into the final notes, that's the end of the story. It's just, obviously, it's irritating. I'm irritated. I'm bothered. I'm perturbed. So we're going to cover this really quickly. Number one, it ticked all of the boxes for the Utah law. So there's that. The repeating themes in this, well, one of them is alienation, not fitting in, and also disillusionment. The art isn't my favorite, but it is unique and makes it feel like a journal. The style of this actually makes me think of the style of Anne Frank's comic book with how the characterizations are and everybody sucks but the main characters, which is to make the narrator both catty and smarter than everyone else. The target audience for this feels closer to the young Zoomer adults and the millennials, specifically, you know, probably in the 90s, the late 80s ones, with a specific attachment to childhood, teenagerdom, the missed opportunities, and a lot of nostalgia. It's a therapy book, kind of like Genderqueer, Flamer, and the audience doesn't feel like it's kids to me. It's especially a targeted audience for adults who may have unresolved childhood trauma, trauma with the church, or traumatic events in childhood that they haven't been able to face, or they were bad siblings and they're trying to deal with that. So it ends up feeling more like nonfiction plus feelings plus interpretation equals fiction. Now, while the majority of this book was fine, there were obviously parts of it that violated the Utah law. It's fine for pretty much every single situation in which this book could be in, but if we're talking about why this book was removed from Utah, and it's not a subjective, do I feel like this should be removed or not? Do I feel like this should belong or not? If we're asking, why was this book removed? The guidelines for the removal were given, the items that make it removable were here, and so that's why it was removed. If you subjectively feel like it shouldn't have been removed, that's different than it not fitting the criteria for what lets something be removed. So that's that. I would also like to point this out a little bit. That when you're approaching stuff like this, when you're approaching sensitive topics, period, or sensitive themes, some people are really just that sensitive, okay? Well, you might have a different line of what is appropriate or what is not appropriate, which is often something that comes up in this conversation. I remember reading a Christian YA sci-fi romance novel, which was sent to me, where in the second book, the adult characters, they were in their 20s, lay together in a bed, not touching, one under the sheets, one on top of the sheets, and there was a 1-star comment on the second book and a retroactively 1-starred on the first book because the reader on the second book said that that was inappropriate, and they gave it a pass in the first book, but when they did it in the second book, they DNF'd, went back, 1-starred it, because that was just too inappropriate. So I understand that people can have way sensitive lines when we're talking about things here. In this case, we have a direct, this is what the description is in the law, this is what it is in the book, and that's all there is. All it takes for a book like this to hit that to get hit by the law is to hit one of those 3 description categories 3 times, and then it ends up on that removal list that has been passed around about Utah. You can say that you disagree with these conditions all that you want, but unless you're a Utahan voting on the local Utah law and representation, what you say, what I say, really doesn't matter. You can have an open discussion and try to talk about the nuance of the situation and what value this book has. And I think this book has creative and literary value as Craig's story. I obviously have issues with the story itself because I think that the pacing is off. I think that it cheapens itself by not actually covering Craig's emotional stance and all of these things that are happening with him, and he just skips over it. And I personally think that he skips over a lot of these things that have to do with Raina and why he dumped Raina the way that he did, because it would make him look really bad. Because I think, I do. There's nothing there. But those are completely different things. Then these are the objective standards, and these things happened objectively. Feelings removed. A lot of the time in the past, when talking about this issue, it feels like there is little empathy or understanding involved in this conversation when it comes to the anti-removal crowd, with little understanding as to why someone might say, maybe this is not the right venue. But I have seen books marked with inappropriate tags before, like Looking for Alaska. At the end of the day, though, you're not going to force your beliefs on someone else, and they're not going to force their beliefs on you. The best thing that we can do is say, it's a stalemate. I don't know. There's nothing that any of us do or say can be anything. And I just wish that the conversations weren't so aggressive and weren't so much trying to get a one-up on somebody else that you stop listening. Because I cannot tell you how many times I've heard, actually, I don't think that these adult books should be in school, but I don't agree with a book ban. What do you think? I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to feel both maligned and to just have people changing the words that are being said to end up not discussing or what is actually being discussed. Anyway, some of the other questions I had for this book is like when it comes to the way that his parents were portrayed at the beginning of this, or like the babysitter that sexually abused him and his brother. I wonder if that was discovered by the family or learned by the family before the author published this book. I wonder what the parents thought of their portrayal in this book. I always have questions like that with, was this accurate to the experiences of the people portrayed in this book, or were they surprised at the way that they were portrayed in a book? What's my final vote on this? I think that it should be burned for the way that Craig burned everything that Raina had given him, with zero thought put behind it. It just seems like, a little bit of justice. But on a more serious note, the book chickened out on self-reflection because it would have made the main character look bad for what he did and how he thought of Raina and how he manipulated Raina at the end of the day. Maybe it wasn't manipulation partially. Maybe it was just high emotions because teenagers are highly emotional. But part of that was also just using her for his validation as well. Especially considering you have the reflections when he's a little older, he could have thought back of why did I do that? And looked at his own teenage emotions, looked at his own extreme response to the situation, but he didn't. And so it cheapened the entire book, the entire thesis of the book. With that said, those are my thoughts. That is the book blanket. What are yours? Have you read this book? Will you read this book? I am personally done so much with these self-aggrandizing, narcissistic memoirs that are always on these lists. Freaking All Boys Aren't Blue, Lawn Boy. Get them out of here. I'm done with these. I cannot stand them. They don't do anything, but they always get rewarded in the end, or they act like they did this great thing. Just reflect. Reflect. It's the same thing that I ask for in any fiction book that I read. Anyway, I'm ranting. So have a great weekend and don't die.
The only people who should come are those who want to meet their monsters.
If this is what Agatha wants, I don't know how we can even dispute it.
I change lives, baby.
And I end them. Sweetheart, no bargains hold. Only fools know restraint.
Only losers lose!
I've been under the knife so many times, I'm practically immune to it.
If your scissors are dull, may I recommend sharpening them with leather?
I think I hit you.
Memoir says I must have a guardian angel.
To enter the ring but abstain from playing is suicidal. Your virtue makes you nothing but a liability.
You're gonna die. You're gonna die. You're gonna die.